What if I told you Cars is actually one of the most surprisingly accurate portrayals of motorsports in mainstream media? You might not think that from the talking vehicles and tractor tipping, but from rivalries to race strategy, Cars nails way more of racing culture than you'd ever expect, especially for a kids' movie. But for every moment that feels straight out of NASCAR or the F1 paddock, there's something that makes no sense at all. So today, we're breaking down everything the first Cars movie gets right about real-life racing and where it completely veers off track. While the sequels do explore different corners of motorsports, this video's primary focus is the original Piston Cup chaos. With that being said, let's go ahead and get started with what Cars gets really right. Cars absolutely nails the emotional and competitive energy of motorsports. At its core, you've got three kinds of drivers, right? Lightning McQueen, the arrogant rookie, Chick Hicks, the aggressive win-it-all-at-cost rival, and the King, the seasoned veteran with a legendary career. If that seems familiar, it's because it echoes one of NASCAR's most compelling early 2000s dynamics. You have Dale Earnhardt Jr., the bold, beloved rising star with something to prove, Tony Stewart, fiery, unpredictable, and always charging hard, and then Jeff Gordon, the legend, polished and proven, with champions already in his past. But honestly, you could draw the same lines with today's drivers too. You have Carson Hocevar or Ty Gibbs that fit that Lightning McQueen mold. Young, hungry, and maybe a little unpolished. Kyle Busch brings that Chick Hicks energy like no one else. Talented, relentless, and always stirring things up. And the King, that's Jimmy Johnson. Calm, accomplished, and the definition of veteran greatness. And just like in real motorsports, those rivalries push drivers to the edge, sometimes towards growth like Lightning McQueen's evolution, and other times towards desperation like Chick Hicks' cheap shot win. Now let's talk about pit road, right? For a kids movie, Cars actually gets a lot right about race strategy. The moment when Lightning skips a tire change to stay in the lead, that's the kind of high-risk move you do see in NASCAR and Formula One. And just like in the movie, it can go very, very wrong. And while Guido's record-breaking tire change is definitely cartoon-level speed, it reflects something real. Pit crews train obsessively for tenths of a second. A fast stop can win you a race, and a mistake can cost you everything. Even with the dynamic between Lightning and Doc, as Doc acting as his crew chief, is rooted in racing reality. Drivers and strategists have to trust each other completely. That communication, that mentorship, and that tension, that's real motorsports energy. Pixar clearly understood that while only one driver crosses the finish line, racing is always a team effort. But beyond the pit stops and strategy calls, Cars isn't just about speed. It's also a love letter to racing history, and honestly, this is where the film shows some serious respect. The King isn't just a character, he's voiced by Richard Petty, and he's modeled after his iconic 1970 Plymouth Superbird. Same number, same color, it's like a full-on tribute, right? Then there's Doc Hudson, the fabulous Hudson Hornet. That car dominated NASCAR in the 1950s, and Doc's quiet legacy in the movie mirrors the real-life story of Herb Thomas, one of NASCAR's earliest champions. Even Radiator Springs, the town stuck in time, feels like a nod to the forgotten tracks and communities that racing left behind as the sport got more and more corporate. The movie doesn't just toss in a few clever nods for people to notice. Between the shoutouts to racing legends and the way it captures the soul of the sport, Cars treats motorsports like something truly special, and that's something that any fan can appreciate. Before we get into what Cars got wrong though, we have to talk about one thing it absolutely flexed: driver cameos. If I didn't go over these, I'd honestly be doing all motorsports fans a disservice, because Pixar went all out bringing real-world drivers into the Cars universe, across NASCAR, F1, and even international racing series. Starting with NASCAR, because obviously that's where the movie has its deepest roots. Like I said, you have Richard Petty, who is literally the King, not just in real life, but in the movie too. Dale Earnhardt Jr. plays himself, and his character's name, also Dale Jr. Darrell Waltrip becomes Darrell Cartrip because of course he does. H.A. Wheeler, NASCAR executive, becomes Tex Steineco. Arnie Kepner, NASCAR director, becomes Artie, a commentator in the movie. And Jeff Gordon shows up as Jeff Gorvette, NASCAR legend turned yellow Corvette? Sure. Then in Cars 2 and 3, things get even wilder. You have Chase Elliott, Ryan Blaney, Daniel Suarez, Bubba Wallace, and Joey Logano all get in on the action with their own carified versions. And of course, they have really cool names, right? Chase Racelot, Ryan, Inside Laney, Danny Swervez, Bubba Wheelhouse, and Gogo Logano. Then you have Ray Evernham, Jr. Johnson, and even Mike Joy that become Ray Reverham, Jr. Moon, and Mike Joyride. And yes, Kyle Petty voices Cal Weathers, nephew of the King. That's racing royalty voicing racing royalty. Say that 10 times fast. But let's talk international cameos for a second, because the global versions of these films, absolute chaos. Trying to figure out who played who, what, when, where, why, and how, and who's replacing what character, depending on what part of the world you're watching the movie from, is so difficult. In Cars 2, Pixar swapped out Jeff Gordon's cameo as Jeff Gorvette in the Tokyo Party scene for regionally famous racers depending on where you're watching. Like, for example, in Australia, Mark Winterbottom becomes Frosty Winterbumper, and in Spain, Fernando Alonso voices Fernando Alonso. And then in Russia, you have Vitaly Petrov, Mexico, Memo Rojas Jr., in Germany, you have Sebastian Vettel voicing a character, and so many more. David Hobbs-Cab, the British commentator car, is voiced by actual F1 legend David Hobbs, which, speaking of, with the F1 cameos, this is where things go off the rails. In the original Cars, Michael Schumacher, racing legend, shows up, but he's not an F1 car. He doesn't even have a name. He's just a Ferrari F430 at Luigi's shop. Meanwhile, Mario Andretti is himself in the movie, but he's still not an F1 car. Lewis Hamilton shows up in Cars 2 as himself, but not an F1 car. Then in Cars 3, Lewis Hamilton returns as a different character, just called Hamilton this time, with Fernando Alonso and Sebastian Vettel voicing him in their respective languages, but it's still not an F1 car. Going back to the crazy global versions and their cameos, Fernando Alonso also voices Mario Andretti in the Spanish version of Cars. In the Finnish version of Cars, the King is voiced by two-time champion Mika Hakkinen, but in the German dub of the movie, he's voiced by Nika Lauda. And then in the German dub, Mika Hakkinen is a character who replaces the Mario Andretti character, who's of course voiced by Mika Hakkinen. But let's just go back and acknowledge the most Fernando Alonso thing ever. He voices 3 different characters across versions: himself, Mario Andretti, and Hamilton, and none of them are F1 cars. Because why would they be? And then Francesco Brunarelli, the open wheel car who's supposed to be our F1 rep, isn't voiced by any real driver. Instead, he's an original character with no ties to the actual grid. So somehow, the closest thing to an F1 car in the whole franchise is played by no one from F1. So yeah, racing drivers are everywhere in these movies. Some of the cameos are iconic, some are confusing, and some are just hilarious, but it goes to show how dedicated Pixar was to making a movie that reflected the current culture of racing, one that real-life drivers wanted to be a part of, and ones that fans would adore. Now that we've met the drivers behind the voices and those cameos, let's hit the brakes and talk about what Cars didn't get quite right. From vehicle types to race rules and everything in between, the franchise takes some creative liberties. Let's start with the ladder to the big leagues, or rather, the total lack of one. In Cars, Lightning McQueen just kind of shows up in the Piston Cup. No backstory, no rookie ladder, no licensing drama, and we never find out how he got there. Of course, Pixar probably didn't expect us to overthink it this much, but here we are. In reality, getting to the top of motorsports is a grind. You don't just roll off the lot and end up racing at Daytona. Drivers move through a strict system, karting to F4 to F3 to F2 and then eventually to F1, or you have ARCA to trucks to Xfinity before Cup. And behind that, there's paperwork, politics, gatekeeping, governing bodies, teams deciding who gets a seat. It's messy, and Cars skips most of it. To be fair, it is a kids' movie, but it does miss a core part of motorsports culture, the fight to just get in the room. And bouncing off of that, let's talk about the season structure and the lack of one. In real life, NASCAR's Cup Series spans 36 races across nearly 10 months' time. Every track is different, every race matters. There's strategy, stress, and the wear and tear of a full championship calendar. Cars condenses that entire journey into 2 races and a tiebreaker. Lightning McQueen's entire character arc, from hotshot rookie to humble teammate, happens in like a week. No mid-season media meltdowns, no long-haul travel fatigue, No recovery from crashes or adjusting to new setups. It's a hyper-compressed timeline that sacrifices realism for pacing, which totally makes sense for a 2-hour kids movie, but it skips over the grind that real teams face across all 36 races, and the week-to-week tension that builds between drivers when there's every point left on the line. But moving on. Visually, Cars is iconic, but when you really look at the Piston Cup grid, something's off. Almost all the cars, especially in the background, share the same rounded stock car silhouette. Sure, the paint jobs and facial expressions help give them some personality, but there's very little technical variety. In real life racing, even spec series have nuances. Teams constantly tweak chassis, experiment with aerodynamics, and develop tech between races. In F1 or Le Mans, car design is everything. Yes, Lightning and the King are based on real cars, the NASCAR Gen 4 car and the Plymouth Superbird, but beyond the main characters, the rest of the grid feels like a filler. There's no sense of innovation or performance development, like no real tech battle between teams, if that makes sense. It's a clean aesthetic choice, again, for a kids movie, but it leaves out a compelling part of what makes motorsports so interesting, the fact that teams are always trying to out-engineer each other. Although, here's a detail that hardcore racing fans definitely noticed, okay? Chick Hicks runs Lightning off the track and ruins his tires, so McQueen heads to the pit under yellow for fresh ones, right? Guido delivers the fastest pit stop in animated history, but here's the issue. Lightning should have been trapped a lap down, right? In real racing, especially NASCAR, which cars heavily pulls from, under caution the field is like frozen, and cars can't just pit and magically get back in front of the pace car. There's no way Lightning should have beaten the pace car off of pit road and rejoined the lead lap with Chick and the King. It's a small moment, but for fans who know the rules, it breaks that immersion a little bit, even if Guido's pit stop was pure perfection. So does Cars nail every single aspect of real motorsport, not even close, but that's not even really the point. The film captures the spirit of racing, the rivalries, the adrenaline, the personal growth, and the connection to community. It simplifies a lot, sure, but it also celebrates the heart of what makes motorsports great. And if a kid watches Lightning McQueen take on Chick Hicks and ends up asking their parents to go to a local short track or tune into a NASCAR race, that's a win. Because sometimes even a talking race car can steer someone toward a real love for the sport. What is your favorite moment in the Cars movies? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure you're following for more motorsports content. Thanks for watching.